If I was a big content creator with a big audience, I would have put all of my thoughts on independence to be released yesterday on Independence Day. But I'm just a small content creator talking to a few people on the internet. And one of the benefits of that is that if you have an idea of something that you want to hear about from me, you can put it in the comments down below and I'll take the one that I think is the most interesting, or maybe that gets the most votes or likes or whatever, and I'll make something on that. Hell, we're such a small channel, I might be able to make something on everything, so just take a second, go check down the comments, tell me something you want to hear about. With that over, let's get into thoughts on independence. Now, when I'm talking about independence, I don't just mean this place is independent of this place. It's not a binary thing. There's a gradation between. And for a lot of people, we don't really think about this sort of thing in the modern world. Yes, we know that the countries and cities and states and all these things are interconnected, right? And there are different power dynamics at play. But those power dynamics aren't as obvious. They aren't as interactable as some other options that happened earlier in history. City-states that go to war are a bit more digestible for people, especially people that are playing in a fantasy game, than a bunch of huge superpowers having a proxy war with several different layers through a different place that's not even connected to where we are. That sort of thought is very good, it's very connected, it has very high politics connected with it, but it's just sort of difficult, and it doesn't come from starting there, it comes from starting small. So let's think about the idea of an independence and a power dynamic that changes where they fall on the scale of completely independent to completely dependent and enslaved and controlled, and see what we can do to make our D&D game and our D&D sandbox a little bit more fun. So what we're going to start with is our fantasy town. The same one that we did last time. You know the one. It's a small town. They've got a blacksmith, a local mayor, some local problems. There's a big road from there that leads from nowhere to somewhere that's a little bit more important. Maybe not the capital of the heart of a giant empire, but a city that's bigger, that's got a magistrate or something at it. Now, this city needs to have some connection to the overall thing around it. The world around it needs to have some opinion on this little town, and this town needs to have an opinion on the world around it. Now, you can do basically what Robert Jordan did when he wrote The Wheel of Time and make Emmedsfield technically inside of a larger country, inside of Andor, but they are so unimportant, they're so far away from the border things, the border of anything that's relevant, that they don't actually pay attention to the rules of Andor in Emmedsfield. It's effectively its own completely independent little farming village in the middle of nowhere that nobody cares about, but it is connected to this bigger state so that when the scale kind of zooms out, the people can see, oh yeah, there is something bigger than this one small town, and they can choose to interact with those bigger things once they are at the scale to be able to deal with it. There's nothing wrong with that. I would recommend you try to get some vague notion of what the scale out looks like, just to make sure there's nothing that's really obvious that would have conflicted with the stuff that you've already built once the players are ready to scale out. But that's not what we're here today to talk about. We're not talking about how to not put these things in your game. We're talking about what would be fun to put into the game around this idea of independence. And you can have something that's completely independent, effectively, like Emmedsfield, or you can have something that's completely enslaved, right? The town in one of my games is a company town, right? They cannot leave, and they can only make money via working for this mining company, and all of the money they make at the mining company, it doesn't come in gold and silver pieces, it comes in tokens that, wouldn't you know it, can only be exchanged at the company store. So they are forced to stay here, and it's very difficult to get away from it to go to some other places. It is in a relatively remote region, so getting out of it without the proper supplies and things that you would need to buy at the company store and alert someone that you're trying to leave is going to be nearly impossible. So the idea here is that they are really far on that line of enslaved. You can also have something like Emmedsfield really far on the line of free, but you can have a lot of gradations in the middle that can be fun to play with. And let's talk about one of those middle pieces today. So let's say we've got our town and we're going to have something from the bigger organization, the city, state, the country, whatever you want to have, come and have a piece of tension with the town that we can then build on for adventure. Again, we're not creating specific events. We're just creating the background pieces that we can build from in a similar way to where we built NPCs. The NPCs don't have, oh, they need to be here for this event and then this event and then this event to create this narrative and make this adventure. If that's not what we're doing, we're building a sandbox. We're creating the elements that the players can interact with, and then things will change based on what they do. So let's talk about what happens to a town where their version of power dynamic differential is that they have to give away their young men and or women to serve in the military, right? There's a very common thing throughout history, and let's make it something like between the ages of 16 and 20, they have to go and serve the overlord or the local city or the local country, whatever it is, the Roman legion analog of your world, or something like that. And then after they get home from their 4 years of mandatory service, they have to do maybe 1 year in 8 where they have to do something to serve, but it's more local, right? So they're staying home or closer to home to do things, but they might have to go man a local fort or might have to go do some public works, so dig a ditch, make a road, something like that, right? We want to make this something that is not career for every single person, but it's that part of the power dynamic is we are going to come in and take your kids to go and do something else with. Well, what can we do with that, right? What sort of situations can we set up? That's a background thing. That's an object that we have, a tool in our toolbox to play with. But what do we use that tool for in order to create drama? Well, what if this town has someone come along as a recruiter and they only come along maybe every year or two, and this year is a year where when they come, there's 15 kids between the age of 16 and 17 that are ready to start their military service, where normally it's only like 2 or 3. There's a big chunk of the town that's being taken away. Maybe these kids, for whatever reason, were born very close to one another, either by happenstance or by something you want to build into your world. And the fact that they're all going to be gone is going to be wild. And maybe these young kids have a desire to resist. Maybe that desire to resist and to be their own people was instigated by the heroes doing heroic stuff in the local areas. That idea that they can go and be adventurers too is a lot more interesting than going and serving in the legions and marching all over the world that they don't know and follow someone else's command. That could be a tension you put in your game, or you can flip it around, right? The people come home from 4 years of service, and this big group of kids who are now a big group of young adults, they get home and a lot of them realize, it's really boring to be in a farmer town. They became a unit that did stuff out in the world. Maybe they've seen combat or action of some sort, and when they get home, they're just bored. Do they turn to banditry? Do they turn to being adventurers? Do some of them do things and others don't? Is there some sort of maybe faction? A couple of the kids want to do one thing and a couple want to do the other, but they all feel like, because they served in the same unit that they should do something together? Those sorts of things, it's not really making any event, but it's making tensions that a DM can go, I could use it for this, this, or this, right? Well, I'm just trying to say, let's talk about things that give you tools to create drama. So we have the idea of the people are serving in the military, and that is one element of control. You can also have a different element of control, which is taxes. If you have taxes, you can also say how often the tax collector comes and how they evaluate things, and that can play around with the power dynamics, right? If you have someone that comes and it is a very local lord thing, they might just come for food and water and supplies for the local magistrate, something like that. Something that's closer to, the farming version of a tribute than it is to kind of normal taxes, the way that we think about it these days of a percentage of something that you have, like a percentage of money, a currency. Well, what if it is some currency or money, or you can have some equivalency in chickens or things like that, but it is something that happens either every year, or maybe it only happens every 10 years, or maybe it happens every year, but the tax collector comes every year. The tax evaluator that determines how much taxes you pay comes every 10 years. What would be fun to play around with that? Maybe this year is the year of the taxes and they're going to be evaluated. And so the local town wants to take things away from the town. They want to take things away from how pretty and how prosperous and things like that. They want to play up these things. Maybe they can get the adventurers to work with them. Maybe the adventurers can play the bandits for a little bit. You can do all kinds of stuff with that. Or what if it's 8 years since the last inspection? 8 years since the tax collectors came along and said, this is the amount the town owes for its protection, for the creation of roads, for being part of everything. That is what they need. Well, in that 10 years, or in the 8 years since the 10-year marker happened, the town is doing a lot worse than it was. 10 years ago, they just opened a brand new mine. A mine that ended up being a point of adventure for our itinerant adventurers, and they had to go and clear that mine of goblins because the goblins had taken over it and they had stolen the blacksmith's daughter. Remember that? We're going to go find her, save her, kill everyone around them. That idea could be built on the idea that that was a big part of the town. The tax collector said, this is the thing that you have. You're going to make tons of money off of it. So you now need to pay the crown more money. And since the town has lost control of the mine, maybe a couple of years ago, now the strain of those taxes, no one likes paying the taxes in general, but now it's actually hard to pay them because the mine has dried up or been taken or something like that. You can kind of make it whatever you want to do, right? They had a thing that was prosperous and then it became not prosperous, but the taxes didn't change, can create that power differential, right? That we're going to work with. We're looking for power dynamics to change on a bigger scale, and that's what we're using for our idea of independence. And this town, if it was completely independent, would have hard times, but the hard times would be very different if they were completely independent and didn't have that tax burden to pay, right? That amount that is going to come due no matter what they do to solve it, not just paying for food and water and public works and things like that. They have someone else that is looking for that money, and if they don't pay it, they're afraid of bad things might come. Well, what happens, and what is the opinion of the town and the people that are our influential NPCs from our last Sandbox episode, when the adventurers are the ones that solve the problem? How do they react to the tax man who comes in and says, it is now time to pay your year's taxes? And they go, why are we paying these taxes again? The road looks like shit. And also, we had a goblin problem that took one of our mines for years, and we've been sending letters to the crown trying to ask for knights to come and solve it, and they never did. We're paying our taxes to have these knights protect us, and the people who actually solve the problem, well, they're right over there. They solve the problem. Why are we paying you? That can be a good point of drama and tension. And depending on how you want to create that NPC of the tax collector, that can set up all kinds of interesting adventures. Maybe the tax collector says, you're right. You shouldn't have to pay for that sort of stuff. That is why you pay us, because we are going to organize and subsidize and make sure that the adventurers that come and solve these problems are working with good intentions and they aren't just vagabonds. So I agree with you, town elder. These guys should come with me to the local magistrate and we'll write them up an official writ of the kingdom, and they will be kingdom adventurers if they pass inspection and maybe pay a few taxes. And, I think the magistrate has something that he needs done, and if you did something for him, this writ of passage would be much easier to come by. You've created a new hook for them out of this power dynamic tension, right? You've created the idea of this place not being independent completely and having a relationship with another entity, and use that to create a new adventure hook. Maybe by that same token, you're not really interested in going to the next town yet. You want the players to be here to do more interesting things in the local area, and we make this tax collector guy a bit of an arrogant asshole. He comes in and says, you guys have pitchforks and some harsh words. I have 10 guards with castle forged steel and armor and actual training. You're going to pay your taxes. I don't actually care that you're unhappy about this situation. How does that resolve? Do the players think, can we take 10 guards? Do the players say, fuck it, those are 10 guards. I haven't heard the DM give them personalized names, thus they are mooks, and we are good at killing mooks. That's up to the DM. It's up to the players a little bit. And what would happen if there was an armed insurrection against the tax collector? Does the local magistrate actually send people in to come after here? Or do people say, the local magistrate we don't think is necessarily a terrible person, and if he could have sent knights to fix the goblin problem, he would have done so. But he can't because of insert your reasons. Make that NPC that we have built a little bit to have motivations and have something going on. We can just insert that here. Maybe this is someone that we didn't really have built up before, but we've been playing for 4, 5, 6 sessions. And as the DM, we've been thinking a little bit about what the local guy would be like and what the opinion of the locals are for that local magistrate. And now this is our opportunity to be able to insert that into the game. The players can now understand this power dynamic and how it relates to the people that are inside of it. And really, there's any number of things that you can do. The sliding scale goes very far. Again, in my home campaign, we have a place called Haven. And when we build this up to be larger, when you want to build up a huge world and you want to have the scope go out a little bit, you can take all these little elements, like I did with this place called Prosperity, this mining colony, the idea of this sort of economic slavery, and then when you build that up another step, and you want to say, all right, we have this thing that the players understand at a local scale. Let's make it connected to this bigger piece, this other power dynamic. I introduced the city of Haven, which is an independent city that has just recently won its independence. It is on the rise, and the city that controlled it, Endeavor, is falling. And they were able to claim their independence. Endeavor was not able to take it back directly. And what does that world look like? In this world, there's a bunch of city-states that are always in tension with one another, and Endeavor is one of the big power players. It wouldn't have been able to control another full-size city if it was not a big power player. People know that Endeavor has lost something. They've lost a big piece of their power by losing this other city that is now independent. But what does that mean for the other city-states? What does that mean for people who want to go and trade there, who want to have interactions? If they go and they talk to the new leaders of Haven, they might be able to get in on the ground floor and get excellent trade deals. They might be able to make a powerful new ally. But then again, what happens if Endeavor gets their shit together and takes the city back? If that happens, that means that the new city is going to be under the control of the old city. And if you dealt with that fake government, right, the rebel government was something that you made a deal for, well, now you are in the sights of this bigger city, the city that now has control over a second city-state and has a lot of forces and resources to send at you. This makes it a difficult power dynamic for people to deal with, and that lets you kind of play with things at a bigger scale, right? Take these little pieces, and you don't need to build like 15 different city-states, all these different things. You just need to say, okay, this one little piece, this economic slavery, this mining town that is here, this company town, is the piece of power dynamic I'm going to play with. And then when you start to connect it to build other pieces, you can build off of it and say, well, I had an idea that it was slightly like this instead of like that. Well, let's put that here on the map and put it next to it. And now the players have a perspective that they can use to then view everything else in your world, right? Rather than building up this massive network of all these different things and then figuring out how they're going to be interacting with it, build small. And then after you have that small thing built, use the elements that you had for building that little piece of the sandbox to build bigger pieces. And when you do that, what you'll find, and this is my core concept of this video, is that the idea of power dynamics, the idea of a place that is completely independent or completely dependent, but more interestingly, ones that are in the middle, can be tools and pieces that the players can build really interesting stuff in that sandbox. They can go, oh, okay, that is the situation between here and here, and we've seen a couple of NPCs that have been built off of the ideas of this is a company town. What does a company town need? What do they need to revolt against the oppressive taxes? What do they need to go back against a magistrate who's not doing what they're supposed to do, or who is doing what they're supposed to do but failing at it because of some other thing? You're giving them all of these pieces for drama, and when you do that in a sandbox, you'll find that the players will go, all right, I have an idea roughly of the shape of the thing you're going for, and they'll take that shape and they'll pack a whole bunch of sand in it, and they'll flip it over to create something in your sandbox. When they do that flip, if you've done a good job of putting together these interesting power dynamics and making NPCs with motivations, the design that comes out when that shape goes off and they see what they've created isn't going to be like anything you made, because you're one guy or one girl, and the people playing at your table are 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 other people that are bringing their ideas into the table, that are bringing their own perspective. And when they do stuff with what you've given them, they build sand sculptures that don't use the forms you've made or use only pieces of the stuff that you've thought about. Or maybe they just get in there with their hands and they curve out a crescent and say, bam, this is something we're doing. I didn't really have a framework for it at all, but now it's a part of your sandbox. That's going to make it more interesting. It's going to make it feel more theirs, and it's also going to be constantly providing you for tools of what to do next. And when they do start to scale out, if your game is one of the lucky ones that gets to play past 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 levels in a campaign, and they start to zoom out and they see the world, well, by the time that they get there, you will have had so long of thinking about interesting ideas, and especially ideas that you just didn't go through with, that you can then bolt onto these different other pieces. To say that here's our concept, but I liked it changing this piece. So now I'm going to bolt that onto the side of our initial concept, and then bolt this piece on, and then this, and then this. And now they're starting here, and they're getting to branch off into all of these different ideas, but what's important is they're connected with this core concept that connects them to all these larger pieces, and they'll feel like this is a world they can play in, this is a world that might feel like it exists, and all you're really doing is taking the power dynamics of the world, framing it in the idea of dependent versus independent, and then seeing what sort of tensions could interestingly arise from power dynamics being off. And how it changes is where the adventure is to be found. The last note I'll leave you on, other than please write down below if you're interested in me covering something, is the idea that if you're ever given a situation where you can create two powers, and you think, I'll just leave these two powers as the same, consider not doing that. Consider your default not being something that is at parity, but something that is apart. One thing that is stronger than the other, one thing that's on the rise and another on the fall, one thing that is good or bad in the context of a particular perspective. Freedom fighters versus slavers. You can make this something that you can always have tension with, and if given the option, putting things at parity, even though it fits with more of our sort of modern understandings of countries aren't constantly conquering and retaking land from one another, that the lines on the map are relatively set in stone in the modern times, that's not fun for adventuring. That's not fun for doing stuff and building a world. Set them apart. One high, one low. One medium, one low. One on the rise, one on the fall. Making things at parity is making things to be the status quo. And the status quo, that's not a time where you need adventures. Good luck, everyone, and have fun building.